Chosen one, lock your focus on this message right now. That discomfort you have been carrying, the kind that sits just below your ribs and won't let you rest, stop running from it. It is not what you think it is. The enemy has been working overtime this week for one reason, and one reason only. He watched what you did, and he knows what it started. It all ends tomorrow. The isolation, the questioning, the quiet aftermath of a moment you cannot take back and were never supposed to take back. But here is what you need to hear clearly. It is not ending because you survived it. It is ending because you caused it. Think back to that moment this week, maybe even yesterday, when you made a decision that felt like it cost you everything. Maybe you told the truth when silence would have been safer. Maybe you drew a line that sent people running. Maybe you simply stopped performing for a crowd that was never really for you. You watched them leave. You watched the numbers drop. You watched the silence fill the space where the applause used to be. And in that moment, something in you whispered that you had ruined it. You did not ruin it. You broke it open. The Spirit of God did not bring you to this message so you could mourn what left. He brought you here so you could understand what your action actually did. Because the moment you stopped shrinking to protect other people's comfort, you did not just change your own trajectory. You cracked the ceiling for millions who were watching you and waiting for permission to do the same. You did not find this recording by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. God did. This is a divine appointment that was scheduled before the foundations of the earth. You are not late. You are exactly on time. Stay until the very last word of this message, because in the next few minutes, I am going to hand you the legal verdict that confirms what your spirit has already sensed. I am going to walk you through the moment you thought was your greatest loss and show you exactly why it was your most powerful act of obedience. And at the end, we are going to seal this assignment with a declaration that closes the door on the version of you that used to apologize for taking up space. Do not click away. Your future self is begging you to stay, because if you leave now, you might walk back into the smallness that God just finished evicting from your life. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like. The atmosphere has not just been quiet. It has been strange. Like the world rearranged itself while you were sleeping, and nobody told you where things landed. Maybe you have been replaying what happened in your mind, scrolling back through the timeline of it, looking for the exact moment you could have done it differently. Maybe you sat somewhere alone this week, maybe in your car, maybe at your kitchen table at 3 inches the morning, with that hollow feeling in your chest that comes after a crowd clears out and you are left standing in the silence they left behind. Or maybe it was not dramatic at all. Maybe it was just a slow emptying, a gradual withdrawal of people who needed you to stay small to feel comfortable around you. You feel exposed, like the armor you wore for years just fell off, and now there is nothing between you and the open air. And in that exposure, the enemy has been whispering a very specific lie. He is telling you that the ones who ran are proof that you went too far. He is replaying the moment the room shifted. He is zooming in on the faces that changed when you changed. And he is telling you that if you had just stayed quiet, stayed soft, stayed acceptable, none of this would have happened. He is building a case that your authenticity was actually arrogance, that your breakthrough was actually a breakdown, that the millions who moved because of you ran away from you, not because of you. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Romans 8:19 says, "For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed." Listen to what that actually means. The world has been in a posture of waiting, not waiting for a system to function, waiting for someone with the courage to break it, waiting for a chosen one to stop functioning inside the machine and start exposing it. That is what you did. The ones who ran were not running from your failure. They were running because your revelation made their compromise visible. You held up a mirror, and they could not stand what they saw. That is not your burden. That is your evidence. You are not a cautionary tale. You are the catalyst. The heaviness you feel right now is not the weight of loss. It is the weight of what you just carried across the finish line for everyone who is watching you and is not yet strong enough to move. That pressure in your chest is not regret. It is the moment right before the avalanche, when everything that was built on false foundations begins to shift. You think the silence means the breakthrough failed. But let me reframe your reality right now. The silence is not absence. The silence is the moment between the lightning and the thunder. What you did has already landed. The millions did not run because you broke something precious. They ran because you broke something that was imprisoning them. And freedom is terrifying to people who have never tasted it. Some of them are going to come back, changed. And they will tell you that the moment you stopped performing was the moment they finally understood what they were supposed to do with their own lives. That was not a mistake. That was a ministry. In the next 24 hours, one of two things will happen. Either you will wake up tomorrow morning with the same silence, the same heaviness, the same distance from God, or you will wake up to a prophetic word written as if God is speaking directly to your situation. That is what the inner sanctum delivers. Every morning, for 365 days, both paths are available right now. But only one of them is still open. Check the first pinned comment before this video ends. You didn't just go through something hard. You went through something that was designed to contain you, and instead, it released you. And right now, before we go any further, I want you to know that everything we're going to walk through today is also inside a guide I put together called Times You Broke the System Wide Open. Times it's available now, link is in the description, and it goes deeper than what we can cover here. Get it, read it, and come back to it. Because what I'm about to share is going to need to be revisited. Now, let's talk about what actually happened to you. There is a pattern that runs through the lives of people who carry something rare, and it is so consistent, so precise in its repetition across different lives and different circumstances and different seasons, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And it goes like this: you rise, people gather, and then the moment your rising costs them their comfort, they scatter. They don't just leave quietly, they leave loudly. They leave with accusations. They leave with reinterpretations of your story that make your breakthrough look like betrayal. They reconstruct the timeline of your life in a way that positions your awakening as arrogance, your growth as selfishness, your refusal to shrink as a moral failing. And if you weren't spiritually grounded, if you didn't have something rooted deeper than their opinion of you, you would believe them. You would shrink back. You would call your own elevation a mistake. You would fold yourself back into the shape they found acceptable. And you would spend years wondering why you felt like you were slowly suffocating inside a life that looked fine from the outside. But here is what I need you to understand. And I need you to receive this, not just mentally, but in the deepest part of who you are. The crowd that ran was never responding to who you are. They were responding to what you carry. And what you carry is not ordinary. What you carry disrupts systems. It exposes comfort. It makes complacency visible in a way that is deeply uncomfortable for people who have built their entire identity around staying still. And nothing threatens a sleeping room more than someone who refuses to stay asleep. Nothing unsettles a settled compromise more than the presence of someone who has stopped negotiating with their own calling. You were not rejected because you were too little. You were rejected because you were too much light, too much movement, too much evidence that something greater was possible. And that kind of abundance can feel like an accusation to people who have chosen limitation. Think about what happened to Joseph. The moment his gift was on full display, the coat, the dreams, the favor that seemed to follow him like weather, his brothers didn't celebrate him. They conspired against him. They sat down and ate bread, while he cried out from the pit they threw him into. And the critical thing to understand about that moment, the detail that changes everything, is that they weren't responding to Joseph the person. They were responding to the anointing on his life that made their own smallness impossible to ignore. His gift didn't insult them by competing with theirs. His gift insulated them by simply existing, by being undeniable, by reflecting back to them everything they had chosen not to pursue in themselves. Gifted people don't make others feel small by being arrogant. They make others feel small just by being themselves. And that is not your sin. That is not your burden to carry. That is their invitation, an invitation to rise, an invitation to ask better questions of their own lives. And it was an invitation they refused. They chose the pit over the expansion. They chose jealousy over joy. And you ended up in the dark because of it. But the dark was not your destination. It was your incubation, because the pit is not the end of the Joseph story. The pit is the beginning of the throne. The silence of the cistern is what preceded the voice that interpreted dreams in the palace. The betrayal of his brothers was the very mechanism through which Joseph arrived at his purpose. And I wonder if you've considered, really sat with the possibility that the same is true for what you've been through. That the betrayal, the scattering, the accusations, the rewriting of your story by people who were threatened by it, none of that was a detour. All of it was the road. But here's where it goes deeper, because most people who've been through this kind of exodus understand the surface layer. They know people left. They can count the absences. They can name the ones who turned away or turned against them. What they don't know, what hasn't fully landed yet, what hasn't broken through from intellectual understanding into cellular knowing, is that the leaving was a mercy. Every person who ran was carrying a ceiling. Their presence in your life, their voice in your ear, their definition of who you were and what you were allowed to become, all of it functioned as a lid. And when they exited your life, they took their ceiling with them. The atmosphere in the room changed the moment they left, even if the room felt emptier, even if the quiet felt like loss, even if the absence felt like punishment. The ceiling went with them. And you, standing in what felt like ruins, were actually standing in open sky for the first time. The problem is, you've been standing in the aftermath of their exit, grieving what was actually a liberation. You've been calling your breakthrough a loss. You've been mourning the very thing that freed you. You've been lighting candles at the grave of a container that was never built to hold the fullness of what you are. And grief over a container is not the same as grief over a person. One is human. One is a strategy of the enemy to keep you emotionally anchored to a season God has already moved you out of. And this is where the real turning point begins. Because grief is not the enemy here, misdirected grief is. Grief is sacred. Grief is how we honor what mattered. But when you grieve the people who were called to go, when your tears fall not for what was lost, but for what was released, when you pour your spiritual and emotional energy into maintaining a connection to a chapter that heaven already closed, you are not being faithful to love. You are being obedient to fear. You are spending the currency of your future on a debt that was already cancelled. You are pouring yourself into a door that has been sealed not by abandonment, not by betrayal, not by their failure or yours, but by divine design. By the same sovereignty that closed the door of the ark when the rain came. By the same hand that sealed the den once Daniel was inside. Sometimes the sealing of a door is the very thing that protects what's inside it. And what's coming next will likely surprise you, because it challenges everything we've been taught about loyalty. Everything culture tells us. Everything we absorbed from the stories we grew up with that said, the measure of a good person is how long they hold on. Loyalty is not the same as attachment. Hear that again, because those two things have been collapsed into each other in ways that have cost people their destiny. Loyalty, real. Covenant loyalty is a spiritual force. It moves with purpose. It honors seasons. It stays when staying is the assignment, and releases when releasing is the calling. Real loyalty knows the difference between the two. But attachment? Attachment is fear wearing the mask of love. It grips, it revisits, it replays. It sits at 2 inches the morning, rehearsing conversations that ended months ago. It checks old profiles. It wonders what they're saying now. It builds elaborate emotional architectures around the question of why they left, as if the answer to that question holds the key to your healing. It doesn't. The answer was never in their reasoning. The answer is in your next step. And so many people who have been called into their next season are still emotionally camped at the sight of their last one, not because they lack faith, not because they are weak, not because they don't know better, but because no one told them that releasing a person is not the same as dismissing them. No one gave them permission to lay something down without laying it to waste. You can honor someone and still let them go. You can hold someone with love and still stop chasing them into spaces they chose over you. You can speak well of the chapter without living inside it. You can be grateful for what a season produced without pitching a tent in the wreckage of how it ended. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share is the part that tends to break the cycle, and it's something most people have never heard named this clearly, never had articulated in a way that made it possible to actually do something with it. There is a thing called an assignment masquerading as a relationship, and it works like this. Not every person who enters your life is sent to stay. Some are sent to stretch you, to pull on something inside you that needed to be elongated, to create tension in you that reveals how strong you actually are. Some are sent to reveal what's inside you, the strength you didn't know you had, the resilience that only surfaces under pressure, the depth that can only be discovered in the kind of darkness that makes you reach for something beyond yourself. And when their assignment is complete, they leave. But they don't always leave gracefully. Sometimes they leave with noise. Sometimes they leave with a narrative. Sometimes they leave by turning others against you, enlisting witnesses to a version of events that bears almost no resemblance to what you actually lived through. Sometimes they leave by making you the villain in a story in which you were actually the most wounded person in the room. And the reason it hurts so deeply, the reason that particular kind of leaving cuts in a way that ordinary loss doesn't, is not simply because you lost them. It is because their departure confirmed a lie you were already carrying long before they arrived. A lie that was planted earlier, in younger soil, when you were smaller and didn't have the tools to identify it. A lie that says, if they really knew me, they would stay. A lie that says, maybe I am too much, or not enough, or somehow fundamentally, irreparably flawed, in a way that makes me unkeepable. A lie that says people leave me because there is something wrong with me that I haven't been able to name or fix. And that lie, that ancient, deep-rooted, generationally embedded lie, is the real battle. Not their absence, not the empty seat, not the silence where their voice used to be. The real battle is the agreement you made with their absence. The moment you decided their leaving was evidence of your inadequacy rather than confirmation of your assignment. Because here's what's true. You are not too much. You are not unkeepable. You are not fundamentally broken in some way that makes you unworthy of being chosen and stayed for. You are precisely calibrated with exact, intentional, sovereign precision for a specific purpose that required exactly the fire you walked through. The pressure was not punishment. The pressure was formation. The heat was not destruction. The heat was purification. And the people who couldn't stay in the room while the fire burned, they were not your judges. They were simply the ones whose assignment didn't include the fire season. David wasn't shaped for the throne in a palace. He was shaped in the wilderness, in the loneliness of open fields, in the quiet of moonlit hillsides where he learned to pour his heart out to God in psalms that would one day be the language of millions. He was shaped in the rejection of his own father, who didn't even think to call him in from the field when the prophet arrived. Jesse presented 7 sons to Samuel as if David didn't exist, as if the one God had already marked was too ordinary to consider. And yet Samuel said, "Anoint him anyway." Heaven saw what his own family refused to acknowledge. Heaven moved past the 7 who looked the part and found the one who carried the weight. And heaven sees you the same way, not despite the overlooking, not despite the rejection, but through it. Heaven looks through the lens of what you carry, not through the lens of who left you. But let me challenge you with something, because we are climbing higher now, and the air is getting thinner, and this is where real transformation requires real honesty. The kind of honesty that isn't comfortable, the kind that costs something, the kind that asks you to examine not just what was done to you, but what you've done with what was done to you. Some of you have been using your wound as an identity, and I say that with deep compassion, because the wound was real, the rejection was real, the abandonment was real, the way they left was real, and it was wrong, and it caused damage that has ripple effects you are still navigating. I am not minimizing any of that. I am not asking you to pretend the harm didn't happen or that the pain wasn't legitimate. But there is a difference, a vast and consequential difference between acknowledging your pain and building your home inside it, between visiting the wound and living in it, between letting the experience inform your testimony and letting it define your entire identity. When you lead every conversation with what was done to you, when the first thing people learn about you is what you survived, rather than what you carry, when every new relationship is filtered through the lens of every old betrayal, before it even has a chance to show you something different, when your testimony ends at the hurt, instead of pressing through to the triumph, you are not processing your pain. You are preserving it. You are putting it in a jar on a shelf and keeping it pristine. And preserved pain becomes a prison with invisible walls. You can't see the bars because they're made of memory, but they function just the same. They limit how far you're willing to go, how much you're willing to trust, how open you're willing to be to what comes next. The Israelites did this in the wilderness, and it is one of the most instructive and heartbreaking patterns in all of Scripture. God opened the Red Sea. He parted the water with a wind that blew all night. They walked through on dry ground, not muddy ground, not uncertain ground, but firm and reliable ground, while walls of water stood on either side of them. They watched Pharaoh's entire army, the most powerful military force in the known world, get swallowed by those same walls when they closed. They sang a song of triumph on the other side, Miriam dancing with her tambourine, the sound of liberation filling the desert air. And within days, not years, not decades, but days, they were romanticizing Egypt. They were saying, at least in slavery we had leeks and garlic. At least in captivity our stomachs were full. And what sounds absurd from the outside, what sounds almost incomprehensible when you lay it out plainly, is actually the most human thing in the world. Because the familiar, even when it is broken, even when it is painful, even when it cost you everything, feels safer than the unfamiliar freedom. The known, even when the known was bondage, feels more navigable than the unknown, even when the unknown is the promised land. And some of you are doing the same thing. You are standing on the other side of your Red Sea moment, the departure that cleared the room, the ending that felt like destruction, the loss that turned out to be liberation, and you are nostalgic for the chains. You are replaying the Egypt of your last season and editing out the part where it was killing you. You are remembering the leaks and forgetting the labor. And until you let the manna of your new season be enough, until you stop measuring what God is providing now against the distorted memory of what you had before, you will wander in the same emotional wilderness long after God has already opened the way forward. And now, here's the part that goes even deeper. Stay with me, because this is where it gets unexpected, and where what I'm about to say may be the very thing that creates the shift you've been waiting for. The people who ran, some of them were supposed to run, not because they failed you, not because they were bad people, Not because the relationship wasn't real or the connection wasn't genuine in the time it had, but because you outgrew the container they could hold you in. You became more than the version of you they had agreed to love. You expanded past the edges of the box they had built for you in their minds. And when a person can no longer fit you into the category they assigned you to, they often don't expand their category, they reject the person. It is not logical, it is not loving, but it is deeply, painfully human. And it happens to people who carry something too large for the rooms they started in. And there is a responsibility that comes with that truth that most people never want to touch. Because if they were supposed to go, if their leaving was not an accident but an appointment, not a failure but a feature of the design, then you have to stop performing your victimhood and start stepping into your authority. And that shift is one of the hardest things a human being can be asked to do. Because victimhood, even painful victimhood, even legitimate victimhood, comes with a kind of permission. It gives you permission to wait, permission to not try, permission to stay smaller than your potential, because the story of what happened to you becomes the reason nothing has happened since. As long as you are the person who was wronged, you don't have to be the person who rises. As long as the wound is your primary identity, you are protected from the risk of trying and failing at something new. But the protection is a prison. And you were not created for permission. You were created for purpose. And purpose does not wait for an apology. It does not hold itself in suspension until the ones who left return and acknowledge what they took from you. It does not pause until the narrative gets corrected in the court of public opinion, until someone finally acknowledges publicly that you were right, that you were wronged, that you deserved better. Purpose moves. It moves with or without recognition. It moves with or without the validation of the people who had a front row seat to your suffering. It moved through Esther before anyone in that palace knew her name, held a nation's survival inside it. Esther didn't wait until Haman was publicly exposed to begin positioning herself. She fasted. She prepared. She moved in the courage of her assignment, even when the outcome was uncertain and the risk was her life. And what she stepped into, what she allowed to move through her in spite of the fear, changed the trajectory of an entire people. Your moment of stepping forward may not look like a palace. It may not feel like authority. It may feel small and quiet and uncertain. But the size of the step is not what determines the size of the impact. The willingness to take it is what opens the door. And this leads us to what I need you to hear before we close. Because this is the unexpected layer, the one that reframes everything we've talked about today, the one that places all of it inside a larger story than the one you've been telling yourself. The system you broke? It wasn't just the external one. It wasn't just the institution that couldn't hold your evolution. The relationship that fractured under the pressure of your becoming, the community that rallied against you when you stopped fitting the mold they needed you to fill, the structure that was built for a version of you that no longer exists. Yes, those things broke. Yes, those systems cracked and crumbled, and sometimes collapsed dramatically, leaving you standing in the debris wondering what just happened. But the deeper system, the one that millions ran from when they saw it fracturing, the one whose dissolution caused the greatest disruption, was internal. It was the agreement you had made with smallness, the agreement that said you had to be manageable, to be loved, the agreement that said your gifting was acceptable only when it stayed within the boundaries others set for it, when it served their vision without threatening their comfort, when it made them look good without making them look less. The agreement that said your healing had to look like their version of healed, tidy, resolved, arriving exactly on schedule, wearing the right language and the right posture. The agreement that said your success had to match their version of success, their metrics, their timeline, their definition of what a person like you should be able to achieve. The agreement that said your calling had to fit inside the framework they were comfortable with, because a calling that doesn't fit their framework is inconvenient. And inconvenience is the one thing people who have chosen comfort cannot afford to be near. And when you broke that agreement, when something inside you finally, quietly, irrevocably said no more, when you stopped shrinking, when you stopped performing the version of yourself that kept everyone else comfortable, when you stopped apologizing for your assignment as if the anointing on your life was a social inconvenience you needed to manage, when you let the full weight of what God put inside you begin to surface, not with fanfare, not with announcement, but simply by refusing to suppress it any longer, that is when the room cleared. Not because you failed, not because you did something wrong, not because you were too intense or too sensitive or too much or not enough, but because you finally succeeded at the one thing most people never dare to do, the one thing that requires more courage than any external achievement. You became fully, unapologetically, irreversibly yourself. And that is not a tragedy. That is not a cautionary tale. That is not evidence of your inability to maintain relationships or hold communities together. That is the beginning of everything. That is the moment the seed breaks open, not in bloom, not in beauty, but in the splitting that makes growth possible. The breaking is not the failure. The breaking is the beginning. And I want you to sit with the weight of that for a moment, because we have been conditioned to read the breaking as a sign that something went wrong. We have been trained to see the cleared room as evidence of our deficiency. We have spent so much energy trying to rebuild what scattered, to repair what rejected us, to earn back the approval of the very people whose departure was actually our promotion. And all of that energy, all of that precious, irreplaceable, anointed energy was spent in the wrong direction. Because here's what I know about the people who are still here. The ones who didn't run. The ones who stayed, not because they needed something from you, not because your rising served their agenda, but because they are genuinely sent for this chapter of your life. And the ones heaven is positioning for. Your next chapter, people you haven't met yet, connections you can't currently see, divine appointments that are being arranged in real time, in the invisible realm. They are not coming to you despite who you are. They are coming because of it. They are being drawn by the very thing that drove others away. The fullness that unsettled the last room is the exact signal that is calling the right people to the next one. And I also want to say this, because the guide I put together called You Broke the System Wide Open exists specifically for this moment, for the moment after the clearing, for the space between the old chapter ending and the new one beginning, for the season when you know something has shifted, but you don't yet have the language for what you're carrying or the framework for where you're going. It's available now. Link is in the description. It goes deeper than what we can cover here. And it is designed to be returned to, because the truths inside it will hit differently at different seasons of your becoming. Get it, read it, come back to it as you grow into it, because some of what you'll read will not be yours yet, and some of it will already feel like home, and the gap between those two things is your next frontier. So, before you go, before you close this video and step back into your life, and the ordinary demands of an extraordinary day, I need you to do one thing, just one. I need you to stop calling your exodus a failure. I need you to stop measuring your worth by the head count of who stayed. Head counts are for crowds, and you were not built to manage a crowd. You were built to carry a torch. And torches don't need crowds to burn. They need fuel, and they need air, and both of those things are available to you right now, in exactly the measure you need for exactly the step that is in front of you. The ones who are still here, the ones who have stayed through the fracturing, who have not been threatened by your becoming, who have somehow expanded alongside you rather than contracting in the face of it, honor them, see them. They are rare, and they are real, and they are evidence that your life has not only been marked by departure, it has also been marked by faithfulness. And the ones who will find you in the next chapter, who will arrive precisely on schedule, sent by the same hands that have ordered every step of your journey. They are already in motion. Heaven is already arranging the intersections. You don't need to manufacture the connections. You need to be in position when they arrive. And position is not about geography. Position is about the posture of your heart. It's about whether you show up open or defended, available or armored, ready to receive what's new or still grieving what's gone. Place your hand on your heart and speak this out loud, wherever you are, in your car, in your kitchen, in the quiet of a room where no one can hear you, but heaven already knows every word. I release the weight of every departure that was never my punishment. I release the need to be understood by everyone. I release the labels placed on me by people who could not carry what I carry. I am not too much. I am not abandoned. I am not behind. I am exactly where God ordained me to be, in exactly the season that was designed to birth what has been inside me all along. I do not need the room to stay to know the assignment is real. I step forward. I step into the fullness of what I was made for, and I do not look back, not with bitterness, not with longing. I look forward with clarity, with conviction, and with the unshakable knowing that everything I need for what comes next is already in me. If this landed for you today, if something broke open in you while you watched, drop the word open in the comments right now. Not for me, for yourself, as a declaration that you are done being contained. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that the room clearing was not the end of their story. It was the beginning. And subscribe, because what we're building here is a space for the ones who broke the system and are finally ready to walk in what they were always meant to be.